Stop. Do not schedule that compensation and pension exam until you know exactly what the VA doesn't want you to know. If you walk into that C&P exam unprepared, relying only on what you think you deserve, you're setting yourself up for a denial, or worse, a drastically underrated decision that costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. This is not about cheating the system. This is about understanding the system's hidden rules, the loopholes they bury in the fine print of the schedule for rating disabilities, and using them legally and ethically to get the compensation you earned. We are talking about the difference between a 30% rating and a 70% rating. And that difference is usually just one single sentence you fail to say, or one piece of documentation you fail to submit before the examiner even opens your file. The C&P exam is not a friendly doctor's visit. It is an evidence collection mission for the VA, and if you don't control the narrative, the VA will control your rating. Today, we are diving deep into the 7 most critical overlooked strategies, the hidden loopholes, that veterans use to secure maximum compensation, starting right now with the biggest mistake almost every single veteran makes before they even get the C&P appointment notification in the mail. The first hidden loophole, the one that veterans miss 90% of the time, is completely bypassing the need for a direct service connection argument by leveraging the secondary condition Nexus Trap. Listen, most veterans file a claim for a direct service connection. I hurt my knee in service, therefore I need compensation for my knee. Simple, right? Wrong. Direct service connection requires clear, documented evidence from your service medical records, SMRs, linking the injury directly to a specific event during active duty. If your SMRs are thin, or if the injury manifested years later, the C&P examiner will often deny the nexus, the link, and your claim is dead on arrival. But here is the massive loophole: secondary conditions. The VA rating schedule, the actual legal framework they use, allows for compensation for any condition that is caused or aggravated by an already service-connected condition. Think about the implications of this. You might have a 10% rating for a lower back injury that is decades old and barely bothers you. But that back injury causes you to walk differently, which puts undue stress on your hips and knees, leading to chronic bilateral knee pain and early-onset arthritis. Instead of fighting the VA tooth and nail to prove your current knee pain started in service, you file a secondary claim, knee pain secondary to your already service-connected lower back condition. This is the Nexus Trap. It shifts the burden of proof. The C&P examiner now has to determine if the back pain could or does cause the knee pain, which is a much easier medical argument to win than proving the knee pain originated during a deployment 30 years ago. This is how veterans often jump from a low rating to 70% or 80% quickly. They stop fighting the initial battle and start winning the secondary war. Let's drill down into this secondary condition strategy because the complexity is where the money is. Consider mental health. Many veterans struggle to get a direct service connection for PTSD if there wasn't a combat deployment or a highly documented stressor event in their file. But let's say you have a service-connected 30% rating for tinnitus, that constant ringing in your ears. Tinnitus is a known contributing factor to anxiety, chronic irritability, and sleep disturbance, which are all symptoms of mental health conditions like generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, or major depressive disorder, MDD. You can file GAD secondary to tinnitus. Now, the C&P examiner isn't looking for a combat stressor. They are looking at the medical literature linking chronic noise exposure, tinnitus, to the inability to sleep, leading to anxiety and depression. This is a scientific medical connection, not a historical one. Furthermore, look at high-value conditions like sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is often difficult to connect directly to service unless you were diagnosed while on active duty. But sleep apnea is often secondary to service-connected PTSD or obesity caused by service-connected orthopedic injuries that limit exercise. If your service-connected knee pain prevents you from maintaining a healthy weight, and that weight gain causes your sleep apnea, you have a secondary claim. This is powerful. This is the difference between a flat-out denial and a potential 50% rating for sleep apnea. You must review your entire current rating portfolio, no matter how small, and ask yourself, what other condition does this injury cause or aggravate? This proactive review of secondary connections must happen before you step into that C&P exam, because it defines the entire scope of the examination and what the VA is legally required to evaluate. If you go in only talking about your knee, the examiner won't look at your back connection, but if you file the secondary claim, first, they have no choice. Now let's move to the second hidden loophole, which is all about evidence generation, and we call this the secret diary rule, documenting frequency and severity. The VA doesn't rate conditions based on the diagnosis. They rate conditions based on the functional impairment, how much that condition impacts your ability to work and perform daily living activities. The C&P examiner is tasked with quantifying this impairment. They will ask you questions like, how often do you experience pain? Or, how does this affect your job? The average veteran answers vaguely, it hurts sometimes, or it makes work hard. This is a catastrophic error. The VA needs precise, quantifiable data to check the boxes on the Disability Benefits Questionnaire, DBQ. This is where your secret diary comes in. For 3 to 6 months leading up to your C&P exam, you must keep a detailed log documenting every flare-up, every instance of pain, and every limitation. Let's use migraines as an example. Migraines are rated based on prostrating attacks, attacks that require you to lie down and stop all activity. The rating criteria are strict. 50% is for very frequent, completely prostrating attacks productive of severe economic inadaptability. The C&P examiner will ask, how many headaches do you get a month? If you say maybe 4 or 5, that is useless. If you show them a log detailing, day 1, severe prostrating migraine, required 6 hours in a dark room, missed 4 hours of work. Day 7, cluster headache, 3 hours, required maximum dose of medication, unable to drive. You are providing the evidence. They need to grant the higher rating. This log must include frequency, how often, severity, the level of pain or impairment, and duration, how long it lasts. Crucially, you must also document the economic and social impact. Did you have to cancel a family trip? Did you miss work? Did you snap at your spouse because of the pain? These details transform vague subjective feelings into objective, quantifiable evidence that the C&P examiner is legally required to consider. The loophole here is that the C&P examiner rarely asks for this diary, but if you bring it, submit it with your claim packet, and reference it during the exam, it becomes part of the official record. It preloads the examiner with factual data that counters their potential subjective observations. Imagine the examiner sees you walk into the office fine, but your diary shows that 3 days ago you couldn't get out of bed. The diary forces them to look beyond the snapshot of the exam day. This is particularly vital for fluctuating conditions like multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, or mental health conditions where symptoms cycle dramatically. If you don't track it, it didn't happen in the eyes of the VA. Start tracking today and make sure that log is clean, professional, and easy to read, focusing only on the criteria listed in the VASRD for your specific condition. If you are claiming knee pain, track limited range of motion and pain upon movement. If you are claiming mental health, track social isolation, panic attacks, and sleep disturbances. The specificity is the key to unlocking the higher rating tiers. Moving into the C&P exam itself, we hit the third and arguably most critical loophole. The worst day principle. This is the foundational rule that separates 50% ratings from 70% or 100% ratings, and yet almost every veteran fails to execute it correctly. The VA rating system requires the examiner to evaluate the veteran's condition based on its severity over time, not just how the veteran feels on the day of the exam. The loophole is that you must proactively frame your answers to represent your worst days, not your average day. If you walk into the exam having a relatively good day and the examiner asks, "How are you feeling today?" and you respond, "I'm okay, just a little stiff," you have just guaranteed a lower rating. The examiner documents exactly what they observe and what you say, and if they observe you walking without a limp and you say you are okay, that becomes the evidence against your claim of severe functional impairment. The correct execution of the worst day principle requires a fundamental shift in how you communicate. When the examiner asks about frequency or severity, you must use language that reflects the totality of your condition, especially the low points. For example, if you have chronic back pain and the examiner asks about your ability to lift, don't say, "I can lift 20 pounds sometimes." Say, "On my worst days, which occur 3 to 4 times a week, I cannot lift a gallon of milk without excruciating pain, and I often require assistance to get dressed." This is not exaggeration. This is accurate reporting of your functional impairment. You are painting a complete picture. Remember, the VASRD criteria are often tied to inability to work or inability to perform social functions. If you claim PTSD, the 70% rating criteria includes near-constant panic attacks, suicidal ideation, and inability to maintain employment. If you tell the examiner, "I'm working full-time, but I hate my job," you are undercutting the criteria for 70%. You must emphasize the impairment. Say, "I am technically employed, but I have missed 15 days in the last 6 months due to panic attacks. I rely heavily on accommodations, and I am constantly fearing termination because of my inability to focus and interact with colleagues." You must use the language of the rating schedule, even if you don't know the exact schedule numbers. You must describe isolation, difficulty maintaining hygiene, and the need for constant supervision or assistance if those are true on your worst days. Furthermore, the worst day principle extends to physical conditions like limited range of motion. The C&P examiner will measure your joints. If they measure your knees flexion and extension, and you stop the movement when you feel pain, they must record that point. This is the painful motion loophole. The VA rates based on limited motion and pain on motion. If you have pain that limits your movement, even if the joint could move further, you must stop at the point of pain and articulate clearly, "That is where the pain starts, and I cannot move further without causing a severe flare-up." If you push through the pain to show the examiner you're tough, you're giving up compensation. The examiner is not looking for toughness. They are looking for the point of functional limitation. Understand that the C&P exam is a test, and you need to provide the answers that accurately reflect your maximum level of impairment. This strategy requires practice. Rehearse your answers beforehand, focusing on severity, frequency, and the subsequent impact on your life. Do not minimize your suffering. Document and articulate it clearly, focusing on the worst days that define your functional limitation. The fourth critical loophole is about taking back control from the VA contracted examiner. The DBQ control loophole. For years, the VA has relied almost exclusively on its own C&P examiners, often contracted through third parties, who may be overworked, unfamiliar with military culture, or biased toward minimizing claims. If that examiner writes a negative opinion, a negative DBQ, disability benefits questionnaire, your claim is almost certainly denied, and you are facing a year or more in the appeal process. The loophole is simple. Preemptively counter the VA's examiner by submitting your own independent evidence, specifically an independent medical opinion, IMO, and a privately completed DBQ. You have the right to submit medical evidence from your own treating physicians or a private hired medical professional. This is the ultimate insurance policy. If you know your C&P exam is scheduled, or if you suspect your condition is complex, you should seek out a private physician, preferably one familiar with VA claims, and have them complete a DBQ for your specific condition. This private DBQ is a standardized form the VA uses. It asks the exact same questions the C&P examiner will answer. When you submit a privately completed DBQ that clearly supports a high rating, EOIG 70%, and includes a strong medical nexus, the VA is legally required to weigh that evidence equally against their own C&P examiner's findings. If the VA examiner comes back with a negative opinion, the VA now has a conflict of evidence, known as equipoise. When there is a balance of evidence, the VA is legally bound by the benefit of the doubt doctrine to rule in favor of the veteran. This is the DBQ control loophole. You are forcing the VA to choose between two medical opinions, and because of the law, a tie goes to the veteran. This strategy is not cheap, as private IMOs and DBQs can cost several hundred to a couple of $1,000s. But consider the return on investment. If a DBQ helps you jump from 30% to 70%, that is an increase of over $800 a month, or nearly $10,000 a year, tax-free. The cost of the private opinion is recouped within months. Crucially, your private doctor must understand the VA's specific language. They can't just say, "The veteran has bad knees." They must use phrases like, "It is at least as likely as not that the veteran's bilateral knee condition is secondary to the service-connected back condition," and they must meticulously fill out the range of motion and functional limitation sections of the DBQ, referencing your symptom diary. Loophole 2. Submitting this evidence before the C&P exam puts the VA examiner on notice. They know their opinion will be scrutinized against a high-quality, pre-existing medical opinion, which often results in a more thorough and objective examination. Never rely solely on the VA's evidence collection process. Control the narrative by providing superior, preemptive evidence through the DBQ control loophole. Let's dive deeper into the power of the IMO, because this is where complex claims are won. An independent medical opinion is not just a diagnosis. It's an expert argument. If you are claiming a condition like Gulf War syndrome or a rare presumptive condition, the VA C&P examiner might not have the specialized knowledge to connect the dots. A private IMO written by a specialist, e.g., a neurologist for TBI or a rheumatologist for chronic pain, can cite specific medical literature and precedent that the VA examiner might overlook. The IMO should directly address the nexus requirement, stating clearly, based on my review of the veteran service records, medical history, and the current literature, it is my professional opinion that the veteran's condition is directly related to service, secondary to service-connected condition X. This detailed explanation, often spanning multiple pages, provides the concrete evidence required to overcome a negative C&P finding. Remember, the VA is looking for competent medical evidence. A strong IMO transforms your claim from a simple request into a well-supported legal argument, making it significantly harder for the VA to issue a denial. This level of preparation is the hallmark of a successful automation claim strategy. You automate the process of winning by providing irrefutable evidence up front. The fifth loophole focuses on maximizing the total potential compensation by looking beyond the obvious conditions and using the underreported sleep apnea connection. Sleep apnea is one of the highest-rated single conditions, often warranting 50% if a CPAP machine is required, and 100% if the veteran is unable to tolerate the machine or if it leads to severe heart or lung complications. However, as noted earlier, direct service connection is tough. The loophole is connecting it as a secondary condition, specifically to mental health conditions, which are far easier to get service-connected. There is robust medical literature linking service-connected PTSD, depression, and TBI traumatic brain injury, to the onset or aggravation of sleep apnea. The connection is rooted in the physiological changes that mental health disorders induce. Medications used to treat PTSD or depression can cause weight gain, which is a risk factor for sleep apnea. Furthermore, the chronic stress and altered sleep patterns associated with PTSD can directly impact the respiratory system. When you file for sleep apnea secondary to PTSD, you are utilizing the underreported connection loophole. The C&P examiner for your sleep apnea claim is now obligated to look at the link between your service-connected PTSD and your breathing issues. This requires the examiner to review the medical literature, or better yet, you provide the medical literature via your IMO DBQ Loophole 4. You must emphasize the chronic stress, medication side effects, and weight fluctuations during the C&P exam. If you are claiming sleep apnea, you must have a sleep study diagnosis, but the connection to service is made through the secondary route. This is a high-value loophole because a veteran could be 70% for PTSD, and adding 50% for sleep apnea often pushes them immediately into the 90% or 100% combined rating territory thanks to the VA math. But the sleep apnea connection is just one example of this type of high-value secondary connection. Think about the connection between tinnitus and migraines. Tinnitus is often 10% and is one of the easiest conditions to get service-connected. Chronic service-connected tinnitus is a known trigger for migraines. Migraines, as we discussed, can be rated up to 50%. By connecting the two, you take a 10% condition and leverage it into a potential 50% condition. Similarly, look at peripheral neuropathy, radiculopathy, in the extremities. Many veterans have service-connected back or neck issues. If those issues cause nerve pain, numbness, or tingling in the arms or legs, radiculopathy, those are separate, ratable conditions. A 30% rating for the back can easily generate multiple 20% or 40% ratings for the affected limbs, using the secondary connection loophole. The key here is not just filing the claim, but ensuring the C&P examiner is forced to evaluate the medical link between the primary and secondary conditions. This strategic stacking of secondary claims is the fastest, most effective way to reach the higher combined ratings. Moving on to the sixth major loophole, this one is entirely administrative, but costs veterans thousands in lost back pay. The effective date. Backtrack loophole. Intent to file. The VA, by law, can only pay compensation back to the effective date of the claim. Most veterans think the effective date is the day they submit their completed application. VA Form 21, 526EZ. This is often months or even years after they first started preparing their claim. The loophole is the intent to file, ITF. The VA allows veterans to submit a simple one-page notification of their intent to file a claim. Once the ITF is submitted, the veteran has 1 full year, 365 days, to gather all their evidence, obtain IMOs, complete their symptom diaries, and finally submit the formal claim. If the formal claim is granted, the effective date for back pay purposes backtracks to the date the ITF was submitted, not the date the final application was received. This is critical for high retention strategy because it immediately reduces the stress and rush of the evidence-gathering process. If you submit an ITF today, you have a 12-month clock to execute all the previous 5 loopholes without losing a single day of potential back pay. If you wait 10 months to submit your formal claim and it takes the VA 8 months to process it, you are owed 18 months of back pay, starting from the ITF date. If you failed to file the ITF and only submitted the completed claim, you would lose those first 10 months of back pay. For a high-rated veteran, this can easily be $20,000 to $30,000 lost. The administrative loophole is that simple. File the intent to file immediately, before you do anything else. It costs nothing, takes 5 minutes online, and locks in your effective date. Furthermore, the effective date backtrack loophole extends to the date the condition first manifested. While the ITF locks in the claim date, if you are filing a claim for a condition that was clearly documented, in service, the VA may grant an effective date that is the date of separation or the date the condition first manifested, provided there was continuous pursuit of the claim, which is rare. However, when filing for increased ratings, e.g., you are 30% for your back and file for an increase to 70%, the effective date for the increase is the date the VA received the evidence showing the increased severity. By using the ITF, you ensure that the date you start submitting that evidence is locked in. The strategic use of the ITF is the foundation of financial security in the VA claims process. Never start gathering evidence without first securing your effective date. This is the simplest, highest return administrative action you can take right now. Finally, we arrive at the seventh and perhaps most contentious loophole, the one you need immediately after a negative C&P exam. The Examiner Challenge Protocol, Duty to Assist Failure. What happens when you execute all 6 previous strategies? You have your symptom diary, your private DBQ, you emphasized your worst days, and the VA examiner still writes a negative report, claiming there is no nexus or that your symptoms are minimal? Do not despair. The claim is not over. The loophole is challenging the examiner's adequacy and competence based on the VA's own rules, specifically the duty to assist. The VA has a legal duty to assist veterans in gathering evidence and ensuring that the medical examinations they provide are adequate and sufficient for rating purposes. If the C&P examiner makes a critical error, the examination is legally inadequate and the VA must order a new one. The Examiner Challenge Protocol starts immediately after the exam, ideally within 48 hours. First, you must submit a rebuttal statement to the VA. This statement must be concise and factual, not emotional. You state, during my C&P exam on date for condition, the examiner failed to address specific criterion from VASRD, failed to review your submitted evidence, e.g., private DBQ, symptom diary, or spent only X minutes on a complex issue. You are flagging the inadequacy. For instance, if you claimed PTSD and the examiner spent 15 minutes and failed to ask about occupational impairment or suicidal ideation, you state that the exam was insufficient to determine the severity of your condition according to the rating criteria. Second, you must request a copy of the C&P exam results, the DBQ and the examiner's notes, as soon as they are available. Compare the examiner's findings directly against your private DBQ, Loophole 4, and your symptom diary, Loophole 2. If the examiner's findings contradict the objective medical evidence you provided, you have a clear case of conflicting evidence. This is where you argue that the VA failed its duty to assist because it relied on an inadequate or biased examination. The loophole is forcing the VA to recognize the inadequacy. You're essentially telling the VA, you have conflicting evidence, and your examiner failed to consider the competent evidence I provided, thus violating the benefit of the doubt doctrine. Third, if the examiner was rude, dismissive, or clearly biased, you can file a formal complaint with the VA Office of the Inspector General, OIG, or the contracting company, ED, VES, Optum. While this doesn't directly overturn the rating, it creates a paper trail and supports the argument that the examiner lacked the necessary impartiality or competence. The ultimate goal of the Examiner Challenge Protocol is to get the VA to throw out the negative exam and order a new one, often with a different provider. This is the necessary defensive measure to ensure that your carefully prepared evidence is not dismissed by a single, rushed C&P examiner. Never accept a negative C&P finding as the final word. Challenge the adequacy of the examination immediately, using the VA's own rules against them. To summarize these 7 critical hidden loopholes, you must immediately secure your effective date by filing the intent to file. Loophole 6. Before the C&P, meticulously document your functional impairment using the secret diary rule, tracking frequency, severity, and economic impact. Loophole 2. Then, stack your claims by identifying high-value secondary connections, especially the underreported sleep apnea connection, Loophole 5, and leverage existing low ratings into high ones, Loophole 1. Crucially, obtain a private independent medical opinion and DBQ, Loophole 4, to control the evidence narrative and preemptively counter the VA examiner. During the exam, execute the worst day principle, Loophole 3, describing your functional limitations at their most severe, ensuring you stop movement at the point of pain. Finally, if the exam goes poorly, immediately activate the Examiner Challenge Protocol, Loophole 7, to ensure the VA fulfills its duty to assist and orders a new adequate examination. The VA claims process is not a favor, it is a legal entitlement. By understanding these 7 hidden loopholes, you move from passively hoping for a fair rating to actively controlling the evidence, ensuring you get the maximum compensation you have earned and deserve. Do not wait. Start preparing your evidence and filing your ITF today, because every day you wait is compensation you are leaving on the table.